On the night of September 26, 1983, the world stood on the edge of destruction. It was a quiet night, calm and uneventful. In cities across the United States and the Soviet Union, people slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that one single human decision, made inside a secret bunker thousands of miles away, would determine whether humanity would live or die. The Cold War had divided the world into two camps. On one side stood the United States, led by President Ronald Reagan. On the other stood the Soviet Union, led by Yuri Andropov. The two superpowers had built tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, each capable of destroying entire cities within minutes. Both sides believed that if the other attacked first, they had to respond immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing, because if they waited, their own missiles could be destroyed before they ever launched. In such a world, every alarm mattered. Every radar blip, every satellite signal could mean the end of civilization. The year 1983 was already one of the most dangerous in history. That spring, the United States had deployed new nuclear missiles in Europe. The Soviet leadership saw this as a direct threat. NATO was running a massive military exercise called Able Archer, which the Soviets feared might be a cover for a real nuclear strike. Spy planes crisscrossed the skies. Propaganda on both sides painted the enemy as monsters. The tension was electric. One mistake, one false move, and the world could vanish in fire. Far from the cities and capitals, buried deep inside a heavily guarded bunker south of Moscow, a man named Stanislav Petrov began his night shift at the Serpukhov 15 Command Center. He was 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. He was intelligent, calm, and analytical, the kind of man you wanted sitting in front of the world's most dangerous computer system. His job was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. Monitor the satellites that watch the skies over the United States and report immediately if they detected any incoming nuclear missiles. Petrov had done this job many times before, but this night would be different. Shortly after midnight, the control room's alarm exploded into life. A deafening siren echoed through the bunker. A red light flashed on the central console. The word "launch" appeared in bold letters on his screen. The system had detected an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, launched from a U.S. base. The room fell silent, except for the beeping of machines. Officers turned to Petrov, waiting for his order. The entire chain of command depended on his report. If he confirmed that an American missile was on its way, the Soviet Union would launch its own nuclear arsenal. But something about it didn't make sense. Petrov frowned at the screen. The data was clear. One missile. Just one. That wasn't how a nuclear war would start. No one launched a single missile as an opening attack. It would be hundreds, even thousands, to ensure the enemy couldn't strike back. Still, he couldn't ignore it. He waited. Then the alarm blared again. A second missile. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 American nuclear missiles were heading toward the Soviet Union. At least, that's what the system said. Petrov's palms began to sweat. His heart pounded in his chest. His training told him to trust the system. But his instincts told him something else. He stared at the blinking screen. If he reported this as a real attack, within minutes the Kremlin would launch thousands of nuclear missiles toward the United States. Washington, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, all gone in minutes. And then the U.S. would respond. The entire planet would be consumed in nuclear fire. The weight of the world sat on his shoulders. He looked around the room. His officers watched him silently, waiting for the order. The phone connecting him to Soviet high command was within reach, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he asked himself one question. Why only 5 missiles? It didn't make tactical sense. The Americans wouldn't risk retaliation for such a small strike. If they truly wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, they'd launch everything. He looked again at the data and realized something else. The system that detected these launches was new. It used satellites to spot the infrared glow of missile engines against the dark Earth. Petrov knew from his engineering background that sunlight reflecting off clouds could confuse the sensors. His gut screamed that this was one of those moments. He turned to his team and said the words that would save humanity. This is a false alarm. No one moved. The other officers hesitated. If he was wrong, his country would be destroyed. But Petrov stayed calm. He wrote in the logbook, "Signal reported as false." Then they waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The countdown on the monitors ticked down to 0. No explosions. No blinding flashes. The radar screens showed nothing. The sky was silent, and the Earth was still alive. It was indeed a false alarm. The Soviet satellite had misread sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over the United States. Petrov exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. His hands trembled. The world was seconds away from annihilation, and only one man's decision had stopped it. But the story doesn't end there. In the Soviet system, following orders was everything. Petrov had technically broken protocol. He was supposed to report any sign of a launch to his superiors immediately and without question. So instead of being rewarded, he was interrogated. His superiors accused him of failing to follow procedure. He explained his reasoning, but they didn't care. He was criticized, humiliated, and later reassigned to a less important post. He was not given a medal, not even a thank you. To the Soviet military, admitting that their warning system had failed was unacceptable. So the incident was buried, classified. Petrov left the military soon after. He retired quietly, living in a small apartment outside Moscow. His wife died young, and he lived alone on a modest pension. For years, no one outside the Soviet Union knew what he had done. It wasn't until 1998, 15 years later, that a retired general mentioned the incident in a memoir. Western journalists read it and were stunned. Who was this man who had single-handedly prevented nuclear war? They found him living a humble life, surrounded by old furniture, faded wallpaper, and silence. When they asked him why he hadn't told anyone, Petrov shrugged. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly. "I didn't want to start World War III." He became an unlikely hero in the West. He received invitations to speak at conferences, awards from peace organizations, even a special citation from the United Nations. When he visited New York for the first time, he stood before hundreds of people who rose to their feet in applause. He seemed bewildered. "I don't see myself as a hero," he said. "I just did what any sane person would do." But that wasn't entirely true. Most people in his place would have followed the system. They would have made the call. They would have let the machines decide. Petrov didn't. He trusted his own judgment, his humanity, over the blinking lights of a computer. In doing so, he reminded the world of something profound. That technology may guide us, but it is still human beings who must choose between reason and panic, between logic and fear. After his brief fame, Petrov returned to his quiet life in Russia. He never sought attention or money. When reporters visited, they found an old man living modestly, his apartment cluttered with newspapers and broken appliances. In 2017, he passed away quietly, just as he had lived. For several months, no one even noticed. It wasn't until a German filmmaker who had once interviewed him tried to contact him that the world learned he had died. There were no grand funerals, no national honors, just a few headlines, quickly forgotten. But his legacy lives on. Historians today call September 26, 1983, the day the world almost ended. They say that if Petrov had reported that attack, the Soviet Union would almost certainly have launched a counterstrike. U.S. radar would have detected it, and within minutes, America would have responded. The chain reaction would have been unstoppable. Tens of millions would have died in the first hours. Civilization might never have recovered, all because of a reflection on a cloud and a single man who chose not to panic. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember this. There was a night when the world stood one decision away from destruction, and a man in a dimly lit bunker decided to wait. He chose reason over fear. He chose humanity over the machine. And because of that, we are all still here. Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world.